As any guitarist will tell you, the search for the perfect guitar tone is a long trip down the rabbit hole. But today, we're going to short circuit that trip for you and tell you how to achieve the perfect guitar tone. Stay tuned. Hey, you're watching Alamo Music TV. My name is Chris McKee.
And I'm Cooper Greenberg.
We're here with the Alamo Music Center in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you're new to our channel, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and like our videos. If you'd like to support the channel, visit our Teespring store linked below for our custom designed t-shirts. Coming soon, reissue of the 3D just to make people's heads hurt. So Cooper, we're talking about guitar tone today. And I know, like me, you have seen every opinion on the internet. Mm-hmm. You have dealt with it on your own, that search for the mythic guitar tone, and that exists for electric and acoustic guitars, right? Everybody is searching for tone. And we all have those musicians, those kind of guitar heroes of ours that have like the best guitar tone. What are some of yours?
Well, looking at the SG, I think Derek Trucks is a king of tone, to give an example, but I've always been a fan of like David Gilmour tones, some kind of spacey. I might get flack for saying this, or maybe not. John Mayer just like knows how to dial in a tone.
Continuum album is like,
it's insane. And his stuff with the Dead. So you got Jerry Garcia. That's some great tone.
Yeah.
It's cool. There's a wide range. Who comes to your mind?
Oh, I mean, great players. I remember watching a video where Paul Reed Smith was talking about like "Wind Cries Mary," Hendrix's guitar tone, just amazing. And I'm listening to the video going, yeah, it's incredible. Some of SRV's tones. I just depending upon the song, the things that would come through.
Yeah.
From very lyrical to very punchy and gritty. Carlos Santana is always that great tone. Well, Eric Clapton's got the woman tone, right?
Yeah, it has the tone.
That's the tone that you want. And I'm a big fan of, that particularly that Continuum album, that Live in LA album that John Mayer did.
Yeah.
It just, the tone is so phenomenal throughout all of that stuff. His acoustic tone, his electric tone. And it's always that kind of like just dialed back a bit and very round. Yeah, I love it. There's a bunch of great players that I love. The tone of their guitar. One that is interesting is I really like Guthrie Govan, the stuff he's able to do with the Aristocats on his own, and Greg Koch, the stuff that he does with a Telecaster still just like that's killer. And there's so many Highland and so many others that are out there. I'm a huge fan of various artists that have what we would consider great guitar tone.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. It's BS. The search for the ultimate guitar tone is a snipe hunt. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I think, if anything, there's a lot of distractions when the true important elements are much more nuanced.
Yeah.
So, I want to hear your thoughts. I have my opinions on how to get there, but also how it's just, it's a lie.
It's a bit of a lie, and we're not saying that good guitar tone doesn't exist. It does, because bad guitar tone definitely exists. And I'll give you people are not going to like this, but probably the worst guitar tone I've ever heard, and then I want to hear yours, but the worst guitar tone I've ever heard in my life was live, and it was Buddy Guy. Right? And then you're like, what? No, he's sacrilege now, right?
Yeah.
But it was live. I was at the Jimi Hendrix Experience. And of course, we'd been having our faces melted most of the night, with Eric Johnson, and who also has great tone, Kenny Wayne Shepherd, Doyle Bramwell, the second, all of these guys. At the end of the night, Buddy Guy comes out, and he's playing a Strat on a bridge pickup through it was a Tweed Fender amp. I think it was a Basement, and it was like right in front of me because I was only about 5 rows back from the stage, and it was just ear piercing. It was bad guitar tone.
I saw Buddy Guy at the Majestic Theater in San Antonio, and
that's where it was.
Yeah, Johnny Lang opened up, and amazing tone all night, just very creamy, rounded tone, and then Buddy Guy got up there, and it was like the silverware drawer a little bit, It just,
ear piercing. Yeah.
But
shrill.
on the recordings, he can make up for it a little bit. Some of those class recordings.
Well, he's an amazing guitarist,
Yeah.
and there's debates about as you get older if you lose certain frequencies, and there's a lot of older guitar players that tend to have very bright guitar tone. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. But bad guitar tone exists.
Yeah.
Good guitar tone exists. But the idea that there's a singular, here's how a lot of the gear snobs will do it. Like, if you want the best guitar tone, you have to have this stuff. Which, for one, doesn't take into consideration the fact that the player adds so much to it. I mean, if you think about whether it's an acoustic guitar, probably even more so on an acoustic guitar, but also on an electric guitar, once you fret a note, what you're hearing is the impact of your finger on that, the fret, and the saddle as far as the reverberation of the string. The nut's not in effect anymore. Your technique has a lot to do with it. Your picking technique, which I want to kind of talk about, has a lot to do with it. So the player is important. The gear can influence it, but it's not the end-all, be-all of great guitar tone. And I think guitar tone is subjective, depending upon context. And that is why, as you and I went through and just talked about some great artists, that was a variety of great artists with great tone playing different stuff.
Yeah.
And so, to me, I think guitar tone comes down to context. And I want to give a few tips to people watching today to help you figure out, depending upon what you're playing, where you're playing, who you're playing with, it will help determine what you should do to get the very best guitar tone for your situation.
Yeah.
So what are some of your ideas about guitar tone?
I think that, and maybe this might be jumping ahead a little bit, but for me, I think the most important thing to think about is dynamics, and something in every single video I've ever watched, all these players that we're talking about, is the contouring of the volume knob and tone knobs, and pulling back a little bit or really pushing, and knowing your amp and knowing your pickups, and knowing how all those things are going to react when you dig in or you're playing the fingers. I think that these people we're talking about, like John Mayer, he's like a king of doing that, really rolling off when it's necessary, but then still knowing just how to make certain notes, jump out. It's very crucial.
It's very musical that way. Yeah.
So a lot of people are really concerned with dialing in their pedal board and, setting amp settings and stuff, but this is the first stop on your gain stages and everything that you're talking about in previous videos. So
that's a great point, and it's something that I do, and I don't think enough people do it. Starting with, I heard once, if you want the very best tone, first start with your clean tone. Dial that in, right? If you want the best overdriven tone, this clean has to sound good. And a lot of what you're saying, as far as understanding how your guitar, how your amp, how your pedals respond, is through experimentation. And so we want to encourage you to experiment. And sometimes, I've done this, I don't know if you've done this, but it means going to the extremes to really hear the difference. Go to the extremes on the knobs on your amp to really hear what the knob's doing on that particular amp, to dial in what you want it to do.
Yeah.
Or another example is doing that on the guitar. What does that bridge pickup sound like with the tone rolled all the way off? Yeah. And then bring it back a little bit, and how does the volume affect that? Those are great tips, and then working through your signal chain that way.
Yeah.
Dial in your guitar. There's a great article, I think it was in Guitar World or something years ago, and it was talking about how to have great clean tone. And it came down to setup on the guitar before anything else, because if you've got buzz, you're not going to have clean tone, even if you're on a clean channel, and things like that.
Yeah, so for me, I'm sure like you and like everybody else, I have gone through stages in my life where it's I want the perfect tone. I'm going to look up this guy's rig rundown, and I'm just going to
Thank you, Guitar Player Magazine's videos.
Yeah. So for me, a big one, like I said, was Derek Trucks.
Yeah.
And if we're just talking, volume contour and all that, but he doesn't use a lot of pedals. So I thought, man, I can get every tone that I want out of a Strat through a Hot Rod Deluxe, because I play a Hot Rod Deluxe and a Strat a lot of times. And I wanted those really pushed natural tube distortion. You're not going to have a good time if you're trying to break up a Hot Rod Deluxe at a tiny bar in San Antonio, Texas, when there's 3 people and they don't want to hear a Hot Rod Deluxe at 3, let alone 10.
Yeah.
And then another thing that I think about is people talk about always on pedals. Like, this is my pedal. I've always got this on my board. And then they add new pedals and they always keep this one on, but they might not stack well. So it's like constant reevaluation of, I have this compressor, it's always on, or I have this reverb, it's always on. And then you get like a tone bender, and maybe those things muddy up your tone. You got to always get to know what you're doing.
I've redone my pedal board 6 times.
Yeah.
It's changed on its own and also with every amp iteration, so it's probably more than 6 times. And I don't know if I think we've talked about on this channel before, but I play through a boogie.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I'm like a worship guitarist, right? So I'm supposed to have like a clean Dr. Z amp or Fender amp with like a Gretsch, and I'm often playing like a boogie with a PRS or a Les Paul or a Strat, And I love my boogie. The Mark 535 is a very, very versatile amp, which is why I got it. And when I got it, I got rid of all of my overdrive pedals. But the biggest breakthrough I had was actually initially just getting rid of my compressor. Insert Ray Star Wars. I bypassed the compressor meme, right? And it was kind of eye-opening because for a long time, like so many others, I had a compressor on my board and it was always on. It was on whether I was on a clean channel, it was on whether I was overdriven with pedals or through the amp, it was always on. And I, like you were saying, I play with the volume knob a lot. And so guitars that I tend to gravitate to are because of that volume fluctuation that I enjoy with like the move of the pinky. And a compressor, particularly if you're too compressed, will rob so much of the dynamics of your sound, and you lack musicality, and you also don't hear truly what the guitar is doing, what the pickups are capable of, how much they can bloom, how wide they can sound, how wide the amp can sound, all of these things that are really what I consider hallmarks of good tone.
Yeah.
And so, you need to turn some stuff off, change things, try out new stuff, dial it in first there, play around, and bypass the compressor. I only use the compressor now on clean channels to control just give me some more sustain, which a compressor does if you don't know, because it takes your the highest amplitude and then the lowest and kind of compresses them together, so you end up with more sustain. And I'm just trying to tame, because if you're on clean and you hit a note a little too loud, it's really loud. I'm just trying to tame some of that. But on overdrive, if you're on a good tube amp, you've got saturation and kind of that squishiness of a tube amp. So I don't use the sustain or the compressor at all for that. So it's funny, we're talking about tone, and this is a warning right now. We should this is the flashing warning. We're going to be describing tone with human words to the very best of our ability.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's great. I think the other thing to do in context to that is, what are you playing?
Yeah.
And who are you playing with? And any guitarist who plays in like a top 40 band already knows the difficulty in trying to get kind of the ideal tone for the situation. And that's why you usually see guitarists that are in like these top 40 bands that play a lot, that have like 1 or 2 really versatile guitars and a pretty substantial pedal board and a pretty versatile amp. Like they're not playing, alt rock or grunge all day long. They're having to play a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah.
From R&B to pop rock to rock to classic rock and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Country.
Yeah, I think that another thing that I always have thought is like the hallmark of good tone is a tube amp. And it's always been a thing for me. It's like, if it's not tube, it's not cool. I don't know. I was trying to think of a rhyme. But
unless you're B.B. King.
Yeah, unless you're B.B. King. Or, there's a lot of... The thing is, if you're playing in a very, like a top 40 band or something, there's so many good like profilers and, modeling amps that are up to spec with the best, tube amps, that I feel like even that is like such a basic argument is like such a false way of thinking.
Well, I think it comes from a place where, the great thing about tube amps compared to solid state amps, particularly of yesteryear, is a tube amp is a musical instrument on its own. And that goes to your first part of understanding what your amp does, along with your guitar. They're all different. Every tube amp, model, even within a particular brand, responds a slightly different way. And so you have to understand how it responds and to play that instrument with your instrument, so to speak. But I think with profilers and some modern software, what we've been able to do is capture the best essence of the musicality of those amps. And so, B.B. King, a solid state Roland amp worked for him, right?
Yeah.
Because of what he was playing, and it was all he ever needed. And so that's it. And if you're in a particular style and you find what it is and you dial in, that's all you ever need.
Yeah.
But I think, the idea of tone comes down to what it is you actually need. So you're holding a Strat.
Yes.
I'm holding an SG, right? These are very, very different guitars as far as the tone that you get out of them. And, it strikes me that some very, very famous players have been known to play this guitar. Mm-hmm. You've got, Derek Trucks, you mentioned, Tony, Angus Young, Eric Clapton played one, Carlos Santana, all of that old Abraxas stuff and Woodstock. He was playing a Gibson SG. And, so you've got the typical sound of this is a very fat, very thick, very rich, very rounded sound to it. Mm-hmm. So you've got a lot of mid-range, okay? And when we say rounded, we really mean like the attack of the note is somewhat blunted. What you're getting is kind of this a blunted initial attack, and there's a lot of girth to it. Human words describing tone. A Strat, on the other hand, also litany of great players, very different tone for the most part. Yeah. Everything from clean to very overdriven. A lot of people forget like Eddie Van Halen's guitars initially were like single coil guitars with tons of gain. Yeah. So it's an extremely versatile guitar. But one of the things that I love, there's this story, I don't know if I've ever told you this, and it was Guthrie Govan, and got a plug, No Guitar is Safe. It's Jude Gold's podcast, great podcast. And he was interviewing him once, and he did this song. The name of the song escapes me because it's this ridiculously titled song about like chickens falling out of the sky or something. Yeah. And it's a very country style song, chicken picking and stuff like you do so well. And it sounds like a Tele. Everyone's like, oh, that's a Tele. It's not. It was an American Deluxe Stratocaster, right? Yeah. And so he talks about in the fact that, it sounds like a Telecaster, but actually that Strat on the bridge pickup gave him that chicken picking Tele sound that he wanted in his head. Yeah. And to me, what that says beyond anything is more than just pigeonholing this into the guitar or the equipment like you were talking about you don't want to do, is understanding what you need for what you're playing. Yeah. Like if you're playing a country style song, do you want an SG with tons of sustain sounding like Carlos Santana?
Probably not.
Probably not, right? Probably not, because that's not indicative of that style of music. And so we might say, like, people would say, oh, Santana has this killer tone, right? But if you put him in that context, he doesn't. He now has bad guitar tone. Yeah. Because it doesn't match with what he's playing.
Yeah, it's like those things on Rock and Roll Hall of Fame where they put 10 guitar players together, and it's like a really cool, fun thing to see, but not, some of them just stick out like a sore thumb.
It's like matching Rembrandt with Picasso.
Yeah, it's cool, but like, are you going to hang it up in your house?
Yeah, the styles are just vastly different.
I think you're also talking a lot about bone tone. Yeah. And maybe explain that and how that is the core of tone.
It comes down to there's a new bone slide that we are making that you buy. No,
it's elk. Elk antler.
It's elk antler. No, bone tone is the short term for basically a guitarist's particular style, and this is where technique comes into play. So, we've talked about how you dial in your gear and, you experiment to find what works, what you like, and then you look at what you're supposed to be playing. So if you're playing in a country western band or if you're playing in a hard rock band, the sound that you're going to get, regardless of the guitar, is going to be vastly different. And then once you've dialed that in, how you end up playing comes down to your individual technique. So there's a video, again, out there on the internet. Someone's interviewing Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck's going through his guitar collection, and every single guitar he picks up sounds like Jeff Beck.
Yeah.
Like what you hear on his Strat sounds like him on a Tele, sounds like him on a Gibson Les Paul. It sounds like Jeff Beck, right? Eric Johnson's a great example of that. Extremely versatile player, but I can pick him out.
Yeah.
Talking about Santana, there's interesting things that I've looked at in his style of playing, because he has this very lyrical style, and it makes sense if you ever hear him in an interview. He grew up playing violin, and so he wanted that on guitar, and it matches what he plays, right? Long, sustaining, lyrical, legato, kind of soft stuff from an attack standpoint, like you'd hear on a violin with a bow. Long, sustaining notes, a lot of legato leads and stuff, not very staccato, not very pointed and aggressive sounds. And he always plays with either the thumb flesh or like the lightest pick in the world. I think it's one of the nylon picks. It's like 0.33. It's not going to be very pointed in the sound. I could never play with a pick like that. It would drive me nuts. I'd bend it to try to make it stiffer, but that's what he plays with.
Yeah.
And that, maybe more so than his PRS signature model guitar or the boogie amp that he's running through or something, I think that, more than anything, contributes to the sound that he gets. Because when he plays on a Stratocaster, it sounds like Carlos Santana too.
Yeah.
It's his style of playing. So that's bone tone. It's technique.
Yeah.
And how that, we forget, and we've talked about it on this channel, but it's good reminding, these are physics experiments, right? All that's happening with pickups on an electric guitar, the body of an acoustic guitar, even the acoustic electric pickup, is amplification of what the strings are doing. They're microphones. And what that sounds like will vary depending upon the string, the scale length, and the design, all that stuff. But the phalanges are what's affecting it.
In retrospect, we should have made this a ranked list, because there are we could do like a top 40 on this, but we don't have to go too deep into it. There's another video that you did that we can link to, finding the right strings for your guitar. We should do an electric version.
Yes.
But so like on my Jazzmaster, I believe it came with 10s, and I put 11s, the NYXL 11s on it, and tune it down a whole step. And it sounds like a completely different guitar. Yeah. Just like very small gauge changes or tuning changes really affect like your tone and your sound. So check out Chris's video on the acoustic version of that, because that's what made me think that I should try out Martin retros, and I haven't turned back since. And they've just gotten me closer to the sound that I wanted for my acoustic guitar. With the mahogany and the spruce, I think it's like a beautiful combination. But trying out different types of strings and maybe detuning, like a half step, not detuning, downtuning. Don't detune. Don't take cents off, each different string and make it sound out of tune, unless that might be your tone.
Unless you just don't own a chorus pedal.
Yeah, do a little chorus ensemble, get, whatever. But strings for sure.
Well, and I think the name of the game here, I think, is this. It's experimentation. So don't be afraid to experiment with your gear. Don't be afraid to experiment with your style. Don't be afraid to experiment with your technique, or maybe develop technique. There's a top tip for you. But what I think is important is to maybe have an idea of where you're trying to get to at the beginning. So if you have a particular genre of music in mind that you are already playing in a band, or you are playing on your own, or that you are wanting to learn, like this is what you are passionate about, you should go in trying to dissect what it means to have good guitar tone in that context. Like, again, I think that idea of like what works for Santana versus what works in a country western band is such a great analogy, because they are probably so like about as different as you could possibly get.
Yeah.
The short staccato, very compressed, like in and out, chicken picking style of a Telecaster is about as different as you can get compared to like long, lyrical, sustained, legato style, playing. And so that's what's really important. If you're going to play, you could talk about overdriven rock style guitar. Okay, there's a lot of variance there, And I loved listening to, going back to like great players like Hendrix. He could utilize the guitar controls, changing pickups and tone in such a way that whether it was overdriven through the Marshall or very clean, dramatically change the sound that he was getting. And the effects really were effects. They were adding to what was already there at the core of it. Joe Bonamassa did a great video for Guitarist, which is a magazine out of Europe, where he talked about the importance of understanding the controls of the guitar and how amazingly different it can be. Jeff Beck's done that, in videos, because they all understand that. Like if I want this sound, it's at my fingertips.
Yeah.
And so dialing that in is, I think, very, very important. So I think it is all about experimentation, but understanding what the end is in mind.
Yeah, understanding the limitations of your rigs and where they excel.
Yeah.
To get out of your setup like what they were made for and how you can just enhance that. I think. Yeah.
So you're saying if I want to sound like John Mayer, I don't have to go buy a Dumble amp?
I don't think so. I don't think so. You could get a clone.
You get a Dumble clone, a Bumble. No, I agree. So hopefully this was helpful for you. This idea of guitar tone, like the perfect guitar tone, again, I think is a bit of a misnomer. Great tone exists, and people identify great tone because it works in the context of what they're hearing. And so if you understand that going in, and as Cooper has said, dial it in here and then there and everywhere else, then you will be well on your way down that rabbit hole, because despite all of this, it still is a rabbit hole to go down in experimentation. You'll be well on your way to finding the perfect guitar tone for you. Do you agree?
I agree.
Awesome. At the end of the day, the very best guitar is the one that you're playing that sounds good and doesn't hurt everybody's ears. If you're new to this channel, make sure that you subscribe, turn on notifications, like our videos, keep coming back for more. We'll keep giving you top tips, tricks, reviews, and our opinions. So stay tuned for next time.